Well, let's turn to Michael Kugelman in Washington. He's a senior associate for South Asia and Asia Program Deputy Director for the Woodrow Wilson Center. Michael, what did the U.S. and coalition mission in Afghanistan the last 20 years really accomplish here? We've seen a surge in attacks. We've seen district after district falling into Taliban hands. So what was the point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the U.S. accomplished its original mission in this war in Afghanistan within a few months after it entered the country. In late 2001, when the U.S. removed or essentially eliminated the al-Qaeda sanctuaries, and it removed the Taliban that had hosted al-Qaeda. So, at the start, the U.S. had a very narrowly defined counterterrorism goal in Afghanistan. But the question is, what was its goal? What was its objective after it accomplished those initial objectives? And I think that, for nearly 20 years after that, successive U.S. governments have failed to clearly articulate why they were still fighting in Afghanistan. Was it to provide stability? Was it to promote democracy? Was it to protect the rights of women? Was it to eliminate the Taliban? That was never made clear. And that is one of the many reasons why we have found ourselves in the place that we are today.
So how concerned are you that the country, Afghanistan, will once again become a magnet for al-Qaeda?
Yeah, I'm very concerned. But, al-Qaeda is not as strong as it used to be. It's been degraded. It's a shadow of its former self. I'll say that. It's resilient, but it's not what it used to be. The problem with al-Qaeda is that it retains close ties to some of these smaller but more potent and active groups in Afghanistan, including the Taliban. So that'll help it for sure. And I really do worry about ISIS, about Daesh, which is, again, I think it lacks the capacity to plan and mount terrorist attacks far beyond Afghanistan, but it will benefit, like all the other terror groups, from the withdrawal of U.S. forces, because that'll make Afghanistan all the more unstable and violent and chaotic. And terror groups like ISIS thrive on all of that. But if there's a silver lining here, it's that the terror threat, the international external terror threat emanating from Afghanistan today, is nowhere near as potent and dangerous as it was back in 2001. But certainly that could change in the coming months. And
one of the main jobs of U.S. and coalition forces was to train Afghan troops, and yet we're hearing reports some 1,000 are on the run. Many have left for Tajikistan. So it makes you wonder about their preparedness, or their state of mind, I should say, in pushing back the Taliban.
Yeah, it's a great point, but I would argue that the Afghan government deserves some of the blame here too, because this is not just a case of Afghan soldiers not being properly, trained to take on the Taliban. You have cases of soldiers that are essentially marooned in remote areas of Afghanistan, in many cases without food and water, and they've had to surrender to the Taliban just because they needed something to eat or drink. I don't mean to make it seem so simplistic, but this is a failure of governance. It's a failure of leadership in Afghanistan. So I think that certainly we can blame the NATO mission for its failures in making things work here. But I think that one also has to saddle the blame on an Afghan government that really has struggled with coordinating and leading this counterinsurgency campaign for many years.
And where do things stand, Michael, with these peace talks between the government and the Taliban? That certainly hasn't gone anywhere.
Well, indeed. I mean, once U.S. forces have left, the Taliban will have a huge battlefield advantage. There's no longer going to be U.S. air power out there to push the Taliban back when it tries to get into cities. So the Taliban, I think, will have a very strong incentive to just try to finish off a fight that it already believes it's winning, suggesting it's not going to be interested in peace talks. All we can hope is that the Taliban will suddenly say to the Afghan government, okay, now let's talk, just because it'll know that it would come into talks from a position of great strength, with a strong bargaining position. It would hope that it could negotiate a settlement in which it would get all kinds of concessions from a much weaker negotiating position from the Afghan government. But I'm not sure. I just don't see the Taliban prepared to lay down arms anytime soon. Again, it thinks it's almost won this fight to take over power. So why would it just stop suddenly? That's my concern.
Yeah, that is a very good question. As always, thank you so much, Michael Kugelman.